What's up? Why, hello, hello, hello. This is Lauren. I know I just kind of popped out of nowhere, but I really wanted to share some things with you guys, especially when it comes to life after pregnancy and why it might feel the way that it does. If you're like, why is she streaming live? It's because I actually can now. Oh no. Thank you guys who have subscribed to this channel. You have made it possible for me to cross the threshold so that I can actually just or I can actually just produce content live off the cuff, which is really really exciting because I do not like editing videos. But anyway, I do want to say thank you for that. And I also want to address what I consider is one of the most massive elephants in the room, and that is life after pregnancy, and how sometimes, if you check out that thumbnail, sometimes it feels like we're kind of being wheeled out to our demise, you know, over the ocean, like from the hospital into the ocean. And it And I hear that from a lot of moms. And it's interesting to me how all of this plays out, especially in the quality world. So I have a background in clinical quality and I have a background in clinical performance. And those are pretty fancy ways of saying that I used to coach, or I still do, coach healthcare teams and providers for the best outcomes possible. And some of that could be um, because of, or not even the coaching, but like the interventions that I would bring out, like reverse auditing and whatnot, or the metrics that I would track, like readmissions and so on and so forth. Um, a lot of times that would one affect the bottom line, which is why a hospital would hire me to come in and try to address what's going on, right? Like the hospital's like, I'm hemorrhaging money right now and I need some help. So that's where I come in essentially. But I digress. When it comes to maternal health, though, things are a lot different. And actually, we recently had a massive change, a massive shift in how billing is done in maternal care or in obstetrics. Um, and it's pretty exciting. And it does leave an opportunity to address some of the issues that we have that are systemic, that deal with equipping you for success. Because no matter if it's your first child or your seventh child, moms across the board on a daily basis are expressing how they feel, and they're expressing that they feel like they're just kind of being put out and left to dry. um and a lot of times, like, I'm in these chats and whatnot, and moms are expressing these things, and other moms are like, mm-hmm, yeah, preach, yeah, I feel that way too. And the knee-jerk reaction might be for us to turn around and blame the hospital, blame the providers, um, blame the educators, and whatnot. And I mean, I wouldn't say it's completely unwarranted, but my experience in clinical performance on the other side, like in the emergency department, in the and on the inpatient side with throughput and whatnot, is a lot of times. Well, first of all, there's a blame game happening. And this is across the board, right? A lot of providers or organizations are just like, it's the patient. The patient's non-compliant. We're doing what we're supposed to do. The patient's not compliant. It's the patient's fault. And then the patient's like, hold up, I wasn't supported. I wasn't told that. I wasn't, And so there's a lot of blame game going on. But I digress there, because where there's opportunity to blame, a lot of times the blaming is accompanied with a slew of assumptions. And when there are assumptions that make an ass out of you and me, there's always space, I think, to investigate and to challenge some of those assumptions and to see, is this actually true? How much? And then, of course, when it comes to attribution, of course, like who's is it actually the fault of the person, the individual, or how much does the environment play a role in what's going on? How much does the system, the processes have to do with what's going on? How much does the reimbursement have to do with what's going on? So let me take a step back here and share with you. And again, this is right off the dome. Share with you a little bit about what this situation looks like to me. If I am incorrect, feel free to call me out. I'm so down for that. I love that. Feel free to call me out. But last time I checked, at least in the United States, this is a lot of the experience, and this is actually a lot of the experience that I can corroborate as well subjectively. So when it comes to um, pregnancy care, what happens is we typically we call it the antenatal period, right? So that time between um when pregnancy is confirmed to the time of delivery. So that at least the antenatal period before labor and delivery takes place, right? Typically, you might have front loaded appointments. And when I say front loaded appointments, I mean you go in, and this is if you're low risk, okay? So you go in, you're just like, "Oh, I think I'm pregnant. I got a positive pregnancy test. Yay!" or "No," or whatever the situation is. You go into the doctor's appointment, you go into the doctor and you confirm that pregnancy. From that point on, once pregnancy is confirmed, automatically in the system, we are assuming, and this is based off of the old global billing codes, because I believe in following the money, right? Um, Off the bat, typically you will have a slew of, like, from there on out, you will have a slew of appointments. And those appointments, um, like on the practice side, they might actually all be planned out, like the dates might be prescribed and everything like that. Or they'll just say, when are you going to schedule your next appointment? Your next appointment is going to be XYZ. But either way, you're going to have anywhere between, I would say, 10 to 14, if you're low risk, appointments. And those appointments are of varying type, right? You might have your initial appointment to confirm pregnancy is about 45 minutes. And that includes a lot, a lot, a lot. Okay. Then you'll have subsequent appointments to the point where you have your scan, of course, around week 20. Those subsequent appointments, the time frame for those, or the duration of those visits, are typically 10 to 15 minutes each. And that is if you are solo, if it's just you. There is such thing as group antenatal appointments, where you get together with a group of pregnant moms, and you're all there, and you're receiving education. They take your labs, you pee in a cup, all of that happy stuff, right? That appointment might last 90 minutes for however, for your collective group. But if you're by yourself and you're low risk, it's typically 10 to 15 minutes. Now, I want you to think about this right now. So, say you don't even have to be a first time mom. You can just be a person who is pregnant. Imagine that appointment, like, I don't know how many moms know this, or how many folks are aware of that time frame. The clock is ticking. When you get to your doctor's appointment, the clock is ticking. They and like by the time you get out, they're also tracking length of stay. By the time you get out to the exam room, the clock is ticking. You have 10 to 15 minutes to be in that exam room and out, out back to your car or whatever, doing whatever you were doing before, right? If a mom requires additional time, like for example, I would imagine that if you had a patient that has a more complex situation, and I'm only talking about low risk, okay? Um, if there's a complex situation there, then it's gonna be really difficult to cut that patient off and be like, "Oh, sorry. I know you're sharing about your insert social determinant of health here, right? Um, but I gotta, I gotta roll, right? They're not gonna do that, right? But you might feel rushed because they are aware of the time. And this isn't because your provider's a bad person. It's not. This isn't because your the office is evil and they don't care about you at all. No, it is not. It is because they have to schedule, they have to make money, they have to make revenue, and that is how things were kind of prescribed. Like that was the expectation, was that typically a patient who is of, this level of health, not taking into account anything other than health, right? But this level of health should only take, or low risk should only take 10 to 15 minutes. So that is what they're given, which is why this is another reason why no call, no show suck for providers. Okay. Because if you're not going to make an appointment, if you don't make the appointment, then at least, actually, I need to watch what I say there. If you're not going to make that appointment, it kind of frustrates things a little bit because someone else could have been seen in that space that you were there. So if you're not going to be able to make your appointment, they would love for you to be able to give notice. And a lot of times they'll say like 24-hour notice. That's at the discretion of the organization, of the practice, or whatever, for them to handle what they have to handle. Okay. Um, and then, of course, there's wait lists, but, wait lists, again, there's no way of getting that down to a perfect science. Yes, that's all I'm gonna say there. Trimesters does offer waitlist automation, just saying, um, and appointment scheduling. Those are modules that are available to providers. But I digress. This isn't about that. This is about what's going on with you. So So that's a little bit of context for you. And in that appointment, in each of those prenatal appointments, you might have labs. You might have, and those labs might be in the form of blood. They'll probably collect your urine. They might do a swab. They might do an ultrasound, or at least let you listen to, not an ultrasound, a Doppler. They might let you listen to the baby's heartbeat at that time, and they have to pack all of that. Oh, wait. Oh, and of course, there's vitals. They have to measure your vitals as well. And I'll do a whole other video on the difficulty and the opportunity there is to take an accurate blood pressure. That is not the easiest thing in the world, and it kind of does cut into the time in order to take an accurate blood pressure. So anyway, I digress. So all of that's going on, right? That appointment is there to meet your physical, or your physical needs. And that's how it was set. I don't think, and this is an assumption, okay? I do not think that those appointments were there, were like, I do not believe that it was intended for those appointments, or it was maybe like education became an afterthought for the length of that appointment. Like, essentially, like, in that appointment, the provider's able to gather the data that they need to confirm, deny, or get a better idea of how you are doing, the quality of your pregnancy, right? Um, Pick out any warning signs, alarm bells, or whatnot. But really, that's mostly what it's for. You do receive education. Obviously, they're not going to just sit there and you know, Doppler your belly and not share any education with you. They're going to tell you about things that are going on, but typically they're going to educate you about what's going on, right? They're going to be like, "Oh, you're going to feel this cold jelly on your belly. Oh, is it warm enough?" You know, um, they might be like, "Oh, we found the heartbeat." Sometimes, it takes a while to find it, and they're digging in your ribs and, you're trying not to pee on yourself. Um, so so there's all of that, right? They might provide education for you, like for when you walk out the door and whatnot. But again, a lot of that education that is given is focused on that antenatal period, and then or the period before delivery. And it's in the context of pregnancy. You're being educated, or the education that you're getting is for pregnancy, especially if you're, well, yes, if you're, I'm only talking about low risk. I'm not talking about high risk here. Okay. So if you have a high risk pregnancy, that is a little different because a lot of that education might incorporate elements of postpartum care, but that postpartum care will probably, or postpartum care, postpartum self management, a lot of that will probably pertain to the child, not you. It probably pertains to the child anyway, or how you can care for your child, like how are you going to feed the child, things like that. So I digress. Anyway, so all of that happens. Then you might have your scan around 20 weeks. That appointment is typically 45 minutes, but that appointment is probably not going to be with your OB. It's probably going to be with a specialist or something like that. Um, and they will share with you a little bit, right? They're not going to educate you about what they see in the scan because the scan has to be interpreted by someone else. So they're going to be closed-lipped about that. They might be like, "Oh, do you want to know if it's a boy or a girl?" Because yeah, they can tell you that, right? You can see it if depending on where the legs are. But they will that education again pertains to the scan. So let's look at this. We confirm pregnancy at week whatever. We confirm pregnancy, and then from then on, we hit midway with that anatomy scan, right? And then we continue forward, 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 and we hit labor and delivery. All of that education that you received from then, again, I'm talking about low risk. Between here and here is typically about pregnancy, right? You're going to be saying, "Oh, am I eating enough?" They'll be saying, "Oh, we need to check if you're going to vomit after taking this glucose test," all of that stuff, which is great. And then, of course, they might tell you about, like, especially around that scan, between that scan and labor and delivery time, they might educate you on what to expect for labor and delivery, which is great. Okay. They will be telling you about certain positions that you can be in. They might say, "Oh, go to this birthing class. We have lactation consultants. They can talk with you, mommy and me, blah, 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 blah." All of that. So, again, the education, think about what the education is targeted towards. It's targeted towards your pregnancy or the the pregnancy or the baby, mostly at that time, or how you are going to care for that baby. You get to labor and delivery, and this is where things get really, really dicey. And I feel bad because a lot of this, a lot of I would consider that like where the buck kind of stops in all of this. The buck kind of stops at labor and delivery. So for regardless of the quality, the quantity, the relevance of any education, guidance that you received before labor and delivery, at, when you are getting ready to discharge from that hospital, if you give birth in a hospital, right? That is meant to carry you forth. That is meant to sustain you. That is meant to be enough for you. And so, what ends up happening is we are just like, or like educators are like, okay, 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 okay. Because again, the education typically happens outside the four walls of the hospital. But in this case, when you're inpatient, things are very different. Inpatient versus outpatient, right? When you are inpatient, which I mean like you are admitted into the hospital, you're not coming in for a test and walking back out the same day. You are admitted into the hospital. That is a completely different ball game. That's a different jurisdiction for you to be uh, under, right? They know in the inpatient world, we all know that discharge begins at the moment that that patient is admitted. I'm just letting you know what's going on behind the scenes, okay? And for successful discharge to happen, education is extremely important for a successful discharge to happen. And this is just physically. Again, um, we're not talking about access to resources. We are only talking about your health and the health of baby. Okay. So, um, and it's a lot. So like they will say in labor and delivery, like there might be an education gap or whatever that they want to address. The and it's called LDRP, labor delivery recovery and postpartum. There we go. It's called LDRP. They really pick it up. They pick up that baton and make it to where they can equip you the best that they can. But how much time do they have with you? How much time do they have with you? And what's going on in the time that they are equipping you for success? And again, what does that education pertain to, right? So there you are. You are you are hormonal. You might be in pain, you might be bleeding, you might be grieving, you might be exhausted, you might have pain medication on board, you might have magnesium on board, you might be there's so many things. You might be trying to fix your nerve because your partner was drinking a Slurpee and trying to tell you to breathe, through your contractions. Who knows what the situation is? We know that a lot is going on in those initial hours after birth, right? Because last time I checked, I mean, I honestly don't think that the mind is fertile for education during labor itself. But the time that you're in the hospital, so say you're in the hospital, say you're in the hospital 48, 72 hours, no, 48 hours, right? The you're no 48, 72, whatever. However long your labor takes. And we'll see how long they actually give you to labor. But that's a whole other video. But let's say the first half, right, of your admission, you're in labor or you're being induced or whatever. You're in labor. They're not going to educate you at that point. They're not going to tell you, "Okay, watch out for these signs when you get out of here." No, not at that point. So all of that education for your postpartum, for your life after pregnancy takes place between the time you labor, right? And the time you are discharged and wheeled out of that hospital. The jury's still out, okay? And I'm going to be extremely conservative here. At minimum, we can talk about the fourth trimester at minimum. Fourth trimester is what? It is that last trimester. It goes about like 3 months, right? We're talking about like 40 something days. We know that. But we also know that the postpartum period, some say it lasts a year. S- Scientists and researchers are coming out saying that that thing lasts 2 years. Like, but either way, I want this to sink in. I want this to sink in. So that time right after you gave birth to the time, or that time from the time your pregnancy ends to the time you're wheeled out the door. That is where a lot of education's happening. And unfortunately for us, systemically, neurologically, logically, that's probably the worst. That's not the best time for it to happen, right? But when else is it going to happen? If it's a responsibility of the health system, when else is it going to happen, right? Because not everybody gets doulas. Hey, doulas, you rock. Not everybody gets doulas. Not everybody gets lactation consultants. Not everybody gets community health workers. I myself went to Toys R Us for postpartum education before I had my first child. Toys R Us isn't there anymore, right? So I just want you to get this. So I'm talking about like bare minimum. Bare minimum. I'm not talking about those of us who are privileged enough to have a lot of this support and sources of education outside of the four walls of our health system. I'm not talking about those. I'm just talking about like what what's dictated by the system, right? And again, even that is based off of, it's relative because it's based off of when you find out you were pregnant too, right? Like you might not realize until after week 8, week 10 that you're even pregnant. So that's even less of an opportunity to get that precious information. So anyway, so now let's talk about the brain, let's talk about what's going on in the body, let's talk about stress hormones, let's talk about that landscape. Your personal landscape after labor. Again, this is low risk. I'm not talking about high risk. And yes, this might even include those who are grieving, right? Because not all pregnancy outcomes are the same. But from that point, you are being educated, you're being built up, you're being taught, you're being told these things to look out for. Um, but I mean, in a perfect world, but realistically, what's going on is you are concerned about the aftermath of your pregnancy, right? So it might be you're just like eyes like a hawk on that baby, tracking them. Ooh, 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 ooh. That might be the situation. And so all you hear, wah, 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 but you're just like, baby. You have a one track mind. And actually, that's a good thing. Your amygdala is in full force. That thing is wildin', right? Where you reason and you make like your rational decisions, how do I say this? The part of your brain where you make, where you reason and make rational decisions. I'm talking about where you respond, not react, but where you respond. That's in your prefrontal cortex. Around that time that that you give birth, your brain is in survival mode. So it's the funny thing is like the education, we hope that the education makes it to the prefrontal cortex so you can reason, right? But that's not activated right now. Your amygdala, right? Your reptile brain is running the show at that time. On top of it, so that's what's going on neurologically with you. Of course, we have gray matter and whatnot. That's at a podcast episode. Just check the channel, you'll see it. But again, you might be bleeding, you might be grieving, you might be fighting, you might be exhausted, you might be arguing with family about who can come in and see the baby at this time, even though you're a germaphobe and you're just like, nah, I really don't want any visitors. And all you're thinking about is how do I not offend these people and keep my family safe? That is it. Now they're watching you, right? You poor thing. You're in fear of having to poop for the first time after having your baby, right? You're just like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. I mean, if you had a cesarean or a vaginal delivery, either way, man, just saying, you have a lot going on. So, a lot of that postpartum education and guidance doesn't even take place between the time you give birth and like the first 12, maybe even 24 hours, depending on what type of birth you had. A lot of times, that education is reserved for the time that you're getting ready to walk out the door. So, this is like the doctor comes back in to see you for the final time. And but the next time you see that doctor or a member of your care team, they will be handing you an after visit summary, and you're going to be wheeled out the door with your balloons and flowers and all the king's horses and all of that stuff. That is when they mention, "Oh, by the way, I want you to watch out for this." And they might even, if they are awesome educators, if they're balling out of control, they might even open up the after visit summary and point to the education and be like, this is what you look out for. Or they might open up that folder because you probably get a cool folder, right? They might open up that folder and be like, okay, look, this is what you look out for. You get short of breath all of a sudden, you can't catch your breath, your heart starts racing, or they might be like, oh, the your bleeding is going away and then all of a sudden it just starts back up again. Or they might be like, or signs of infection or signs of inflammation. So they might use a little bit of like healthcare jargon, or they might, I've seen this too. And actually this was pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie. They might have a channel that's on repeat with um with what to expect after pregnancy, and they're like, okay, let's sit down, let's watch this movie. And of course, before you leave, you're getting ready to get wheeled out of that place, right? Before you leave, they're just like, have any questions? Have any questions? Which is wild, because that educational session, I would say, like, okay, best case scenario, say that educational session that for discharge lasts an hour. Come on, let's be real. But yeah, say it lasts an hour. Say you're given an hour in a perfect world, right? That education is meant to equip you for life after pregnancy, or at least until you can make it to your postpartum appointment. Now, depending on what state you're in, depending on what payer you have, you might have one appointment, you might have three appointment, you might have telehealth, you might not have telehealth. It varies a lot at that point. But dare I say it, last time I checked, and I have researched this, by the way, you're asking questions. Remember how they're wheeling you out the door and you're just like, any questions? Last time I checked, you had questions, a lot of questions, between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning after you were discharged from the hospital that night. How do I know that? How do I know? That's what Google says. You're Googling at that time. That's when the questions come up. So it's ironic. It really is ironic, because the thing is, I'm not the only one who knows this. Healthcare organizations know this, right? Um, Healthcare organizations know this. as well. But like when I'll just say it this way, when the learner, which is the patient, which is the mom, which is you or the parent or whomever, the guardian, when the learner is motivated, they're motivated. That's typically evidenced by them asking questions, but we're not ready to really ask those questions. We're not really in our fertile state to consume information and to, I'm not even going to talk about storing it, but consume information until about what, 2, 4 o'clock in the morning. And the type of information, the type of education that we need is, last time I checked, not very generic. So before I go on, let me touch on a few things. Let me touch on a few things. Okay. I do think that we have an incredible opportunity in healthcare to learn from our educators, especially those champions in the public health system. They are incredible, right? They might go to seminars and workshops and learn about how to best educate, how to how to um how to evaluate if education was done or the quality of the education, right? They might know things like teach back and how to use teach back, right? They might learn that it's important for someone to hear something more than one time, right? So last time I checked, and this is, I was a school nurse as well, but whatever. I digress. Last time I checked, a person had to hear something more than one time for them to learn it. Last time I checked. And that is if they're an auditory learner as well. Um, so we know this. Teachers know this. Teachers know that um, you can't hand you can't hand a student a flyer or a pamphlet and assume that they're going to succeed and be able to take that, internalize it, right? And then turn around and leverage that information, right? Apply it to their situation and be successful. No. And I'm not saying that we that we should have that expectation in healthcare, but I do think that it would behoove us in healthcare to take a page out of their book, right? Especially the public school teachers, champions. To take a page out of their book, to learn from them about how they're different. This is gonna sound crazy. Woo. But how there are different strokes for different folks when it comes to education and learning, when it comes to support. Layer on top of this experience what it's like to, I mean, there's so many things that can affect the best case scenario. Unfortunately, the best case scenario, best is a relative term, right? Unfortunately, the best case scenario doesn't necessarily yield consistently the best outcomes. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I'll put it that way, right? But then of course you have different opportunities too. You have those who don't speak the same language as their educator, literally, right? Literally. You might have, and I saw this not too long ago, a parents in the NICU, and they are using Google Translate to communicate with members of their care team for how to, what's going to happen for a speech evaluation so that they can give informed consent. Things like that, right? And I'm not over here trying to paint an abysmal picture and say, "Oh, there's no hope, everything's bad. This isn't going to work." No, I'm not saying that. I'm not over here saying those pamphlets, they suck. There's no point to them. No, I'm not saying that either. Right. I'm not here saying, the pamphlets, they need to be in every single language and blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is it would behoove us to take a look at what we are dealing with in reality, the circumstances, the environment, the um dare I say it, the variables around what's going on, and what's available, because now that you hear this, I hope, oh, I'm going to get in trouble, but now that you hear what I'm saying about the duration of those prenatal visits, and the what goes on during your scan, that's at 45 weeks, sorry, at 20 weeks, and what they're supposed to be saying to you then, and where education typically happens logically before discharge. I hope that this helps you realize that your situation and your frustration with, and not only your situation, your frustration, but like, I hope to validate some feelings out there too. That if you feel like after you left the hospital, you were kind of left high and dry, there might be some validity to how you are feeling. And if you're thinking that um, you were left high and dry because the folks caring for you were terrible educators and they didn't, I hope this gives you an opportunity to consider a little bit about the reality of life, life in the hospital or life in LDRP, and what they're dealing with, because again, not and I'm not trying to be like, "Oh, you don't matter, you're not special." I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is, like, they have multiple patients, and in order to do this, in order for that unit to run, in order for those operations to take place, they have to have a system, they have to have processes, they have to be able to bill, and these are the circumstances that this is what they're dealing with. So that might contribute to why you're like at 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning, is this normal? That might be why at 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning, you're like, I can't get up and I can't get out of bed. I don't know what to do, because the subject of that education that you were given was largely pertained to pregnancy and that baby. That pamphlet, though, might pertain to warning signs for you to look out for. But what's normal, you don't know, which is why you're literally Googling, is this normal? XYZ, which is why we're on Facebook and we're just like, is this normal? XYZ. What do you think? XYZ. Why we're on Chat GPT and we're like, is this normal? XYZ. And when we're asking, is this normal? It's typically something, because I'm not gonna even I saw like the top I saw like the top I what I did this top 12 questions, and the top 12 questions came back to me as and I fact checked them, don't worry. But they came back to me as like, oh, they're open-ended type of questions that like, it's not like you're typing the same thing in verbatim for the entire question. Like, that question always has some sort of context. And that context or the answer to your question has to be in context, right? To you and your situation and what's going on with you and your surroundings. So that is the highest. Now, let me go back to education. And I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but think about this. Again, when I was talking about like education and being taught and blah 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 blah, I was talking about learning these concepts, right? Learning the material. But in order to take that knowledge or that education, that data, that information, there we go. That's what I was looking for. Thank you, brain. And apply it to a concept, apply it to a situation, to layer in or incorporate context. You have to have understanding. And oftentimes, that understanding does not come from reptile brain. It's like it doesn't even get there until coding, and the coding happens when you're sleeping and you're not sleeping. Okay. I'm gonna slow down. But anyway, so there's that. So there is a reason why there is a major disconnect. And I promise you, like when parents or folks after pregnancy want answers, they're going to ask questions. They're going to ask questions. But unfortunately, the timing, because timing is everything, right? Unfortunately, the timing of those questions are not aligned with office hours. Unfortunately, the timing of those questions or the time that you are ready to ingest information or hopefully use that information, unfortunately, that is not when office hour that's not compatible with office hours right there, right? So there that is. So when you're looking for answers and you have questions, of course, we are going to turn to we're going to take the path of least resistance, right? Because we're tired, we're probably, stuck in bed. Um we're trying to figure things out, we're stressed, or we might be like in euphoria. That happens too. Hey. Um but those questions typically arrive, or at least they initially arrive early in the morning, right? Or, 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know if this would reinforce, like help or hinder our trust in the support that we have. Like, thank you, hospital. You gave me this after visit summary. I know that 988, which is for mental health, maternal mental health emergencies, is available 24/7, 7 days a week. You hear that? Don't wait. Don't wait. If you have the thought that like maybe I might need, call the number. Okay? Maybe call it 988. I wish I wasn't live so I could put that on the screen. 988. Call it. But I digress. But when it comes to that, like, yeah, does it help or hinder our trust in the support that we have? That at the moment that I really, really need, support, answers, someone to kind of fill in the blanks within context of what I'm going through, not like generically, but specifically. Instead of context, I should say specific, right? But specifically to me in my situation, it's it's not there. And so I have to, I resort to what's available. Or I can pick up the phone and call my friend who said, no matter what time it is, girl, you can call me, right? And then like resort to your friend, which is great. You know, that is great. But I propose, and I'm trying not to let too much out of the bag here. So actually, let me pause there. Yeah, let me pause there. So hopefully, what I shared with you, like if that resonated at all, please leave a comment. If you're just like, Lauren, you are crazy. Nah, all everything that you said is trash. Put it in a comment. Or Lauren, the evidence is saying otherwise. Put in a comment. Or my experience was completely different because I went to this hospital and blah blah blah. If you want to shout them out, put it in the comment. Let us know, because I'm not here trying to indoctrinate you and be like, this is why, and don't question me. But what I am trying to do is offer you some insights into the inner workings of, like, the inner workings, the operations, the circumstances, the platform that you're dealing with. There is no, like, from there, obviously, I mean, I can easily say, if you've been on this channel before, I can obviously say, yes, maybe that is the reason why we have Esther. Maybe that is the reason why Esther is uniquely positioned, or was intentionally built, at least at this time, for we started with postpartum, life after pregnancy. Perhaps that's why. Perhaps that's why when it comes to Esther, context is everything. And Esther has the capability to learn your situation so that when you ask non medical questions to Esther, Esther is able to respond informed by your situation because Esther learned your situation. Perhaps. Um, so there's that. There's also, I mean, me selfishly, I love objective data. Objective data makes me happy. Um, but that's also a reason why, if you look on our roadmap for Esther, you can see it in the GitHub repository. I will add it to the bottom of this, the description or something. I'll update the description. But you also see that Esther, pretty soon, like, I mean, Esther, we want we have biometric capabilities for Esther. Like, we want folks to be able to have their biometric insights be chattable. Like, we want folks to be able to see things like how well they slept, right? Their stress level according to their biometrics, so their heart rate variability, their recovery, because you're physically and mentally, folks don't like me saying recover, and I get it, and that's totally cool, but you are recovering from pregnancy. But actually, what I should be saying is you're leveling up, because actually, what's going on in the brain is incredible. Incredible. Like, it's a great time for recreation. It does not feel that way, but it's a great opportunity to learn a new language, or, things like that. Anyway, I digress. And then that's also why I shared with you guys about Esther's ability to reinforce education, and of course, when that education is reinforced, it's reinforced within your context, in your language, at your level, right? But then also, Esther's able to teach you resilience and whatnot so that you can code that information safely right there in your prefrontal cortex in your brain. So there are those things. Um, But yeah, so I digress, but I hope you hear me when I'm saying you're not crazy, right? I'm not here to gaslight you. You're not crazy. This was just a what 50 we're at 54 minutes. This was just a 54-minute impromptu off the dome walk through like the background of what might be going on generally low risk with your education time frame and how and them equipping you and training you and preparing you for life after pregnancy. And this is my long way of saying perhaps with a companion that gets your context, has your objective biometric data, and knows your pregnancy outcome, knows where you are on your postpartum journey, knows certain risks typically peak at this week, perhaps that might help. I'm not saying Esther instead of, I'm saying you can have your cake and eat it too. So, anyway, thank you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, anything like that, you all already know I'm totally down. I'm totally open. And if this was helpful to any of you, please, please, please consider um, leaving a comment, subscribing, and please consider sharing this with someone who would actually benefit from it and find value. Because what I'm trying to do is bring you value, not fluff. All right, catch you on the other side.